Is the story of Cain and Abel strictly about morality? Jordan Peterson sees the story as a lesson on sacrifice and bitterness. But what if the story has something much more interesting beneath the surface? What if the story isn't about morality at all? Before I start, I want to point out that I firmly believe in interpreting literature, and by extension the Bible, in any way you find productive. At the end of the day, whether we like to admit it or not, we constantly insert meaning into stories the authors may have never intended. That being said, and to get back into Peterson's interpretations, perhaps due to his profession, Peterson tends to add a psychological lens to many of his interpretations, if not all. And this can sometimes lead him to remove or omit important historical context that could help us see the stories entirely different. Take Dante's Inferno, for example. Peterson notes how Dante places betrayal at the very bottom of hell, as if it's the worst sin possible. But we need to know Dante's perspective was influenced by his own personal experience. After all, Dante felt deeply betrayed by his country, his friends, his people, so perhaps for him betrayal felt like the ultimate sin. This is why I believe it's so important to consider the historical and personal context that shapes these stories. My goal here isn't to attack Peterson's position, but to offer nuance. I want to add a level of complexity that possibly suggests an alternative reason as to why the story was told in the first place. So let's dive into some of the historical context. Most scholars, including Peterson, agree that this story is likely part of a longer oral tradition that didn't make it into the text. As a result, we're left with a narrative that offers no clear explanation for why God rejects Cain's offering while accepting Abel's. However, we can draw from historical context to help shift our perspective. Around the same time the Cain and Abel narrative was likely composed, there were ongoing conflicts between hunters, nomadic shepherds, and farmers. This cultural tension appears in other ancient works as well. For instance, the Epic of Gilgamesh uses the character of Enkidu, who abandons his wild nomadic life after being seduced by Shamat, as a metaphor for the Neolithic revolution when humans shifted from hunting and gathering to farming and domestication. We see a slightly different reflection of this tension in the debate between the hoe and the plow. Another text from around the same period, it presents a symbolic dispute between tools of farming, highlighting the social and ideological struggles tied to the agricultural progress. So now let's think, what if the same kind of conflict is baked into Cain and Abel? When we consider this context, the story takes on a whole new layer of meaning. Rather than a simple tale of morality, it may reflect the real-world conflict between two emerging ways of life, shepherds versus farmers. The text gives us no reason for God's rejection of Cain's offering, forcing us, the reader, to make assumptions. One common assumption, which Peterson appears to accept without much skepticism, is that Cain's nature is simply flawed or evil. But with this added context, we can consider a third possibility. What if the story's rhetorical goal is to vilify a farming lifestyle? What if it's a form of ancient propaganda, designed to depict farmers as less favored by God, perhaps even inherently sinful, while portraying nomadic shepherds as divinely approved? And if that's possible, what kind of lesson can we draw from this? The power of stories to shape our thinking. Stories not only convey morals, but also shape cultural biases and social identities. Through narratives like Cain and Abel, ancient societies may have justified mistrust or hostility towards certain groups, framing them as enemies of the divine order. Where Peterson sees the story as a warning against bitterness and resentment, the historical context offers a different caution. Be wary of the stories we trust and the enemies we are told to hate. It reminds us to think for ourselves and judge the character and the motives of those trying to convince us to despise another.